Hey guys, Sonny again. You get to see me this time. I'm actually going to record a little bit more information on ECG, and I've posted some modules in Moodle for you to take a look at. Hopefully you've seen the video of the folks telling you about ECG, where it comes from, and those kind of things. This just actually expands on that a little bit. It's a step-by-step process for understanding how we determine what is an accurate or a normal ECG and the steps we go through for doing that. And it's going to help you understand a little bit better about what ECG is, how it's interpreted, and that's going to be extremely important for you as biomedical technicians, because I've mentioned this before. If you get called to an ICU or an OR someplace like that, and the doctor and the nurse say the ECG machine is wrong, you've got to know if the machine is giving them the right information or not. And the way you can do it, one way of knowing that, is to be able to look at the ECG, interpret it for yourself, and make sure then that the ECG machine is interpreted in the same way. Otherwise, you know, you just got to take their word for it, and they may or may not be right. So anyway, we'll go through a step-by-step process. There's actually several of these modules, and we're going to have to run through them kind of quickly because each one of these videos has got to be less than 10 minutes long. So go back and look at them as many times as you need to, but you need to understand this information because it will be on a test in a couple of weeks. First of all, some objectives for this class. We're going to recognize normal rhythm, also known as normal sinus rhythm. And by the way, I know you've heard that term normal sinus rhythm all your life. It's actually very descriptive, and it's very precise in what it means, so we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. We're going to recognize 13 of the most common rhythm disturbances, and we're going to recognize an acute myocardial infarction on a 12-lead EKG. It's basically a heart attack. But we're going to talk about that and how to interpret that as well, because that's, again, that's something that you got to understand to be able to know if this machine is actually working right or not. Okay, first thing is ECG basics, how to analyze an ECG. We're going to talk about normal sinus rhythm, heart arrhythmias, and diagnosing the MI. First thing, as illustrated in red here, is ECG basics. This is a review of what you saw in your earlier video. But remember what the SA node is, the sinoatrial node. It's actual normal, normally it's considered to be the pacemaker of the heart, or the natural pacemaker of the heart. The AV node, or atrioventricular node here, then there are a bundle of his, a right and left bundle of branches, and then the Purkinje fibers over here. And that's just the normal pathway for the ECG signal to follow. And we see here in red arrow is illustrating that the SA node fires a signal, and it's just a little blip, and it's a signal that goes through the atrial muscles and ends up at the AV node, where we know it's delayed before going on to the ventricles. And then we see it going on around the left and right bundle branches, and ultimately to the Purkinje fibers, which end up delivering the impulse to the ventricles. So what we end up with is actually a distribution of the ECG signal to the top part of the heart, the atria is here first, and then to the ventricles. Because what we want to have happen is, it's not like the heart pumps like this. It pumps down and then it pumps back up because of these arteries, veins, and valves that are inside of it here to direct the blood in a particular direction. So the atrias squeeze, which squeezes and pushes blood down into the ventricles. Then the ventricles, the signal that then comes through the ventricles, contracts them and shoots the blood out to one of two directions. Part of it goes to the lungs, the other goes to the systemic system, or basically our body. So, important to remember. And don't forget that AV delay. The reason it's there is to allow time for that to happen. By the way, the heart doesn't just pump in this direction. It sort of acts in a ringing fashion. By that I mean like it twists slightly as well. So as this pumps down, and these are pumping up, the ventricles sort of twist, have a twisting effect like that, to try to wring as much of the blood out of it as it can. It's just more effective and efficient that way. Okay, you've seen the P, Q, R, S, and T complex on earlier videos and also and other things on Moodle. It's called the QRS for short. They rarely call it the PQRS-T wave, but they will call it the QRS wave. Just keep in mind that technically QRS is this portion of it here, but when they say QRS, and I say they being the nurses or the doctors, they may be referring to the whole thing, or they may be referring to this. The other thing that we'll call it sometimes, if they're only referring to this portion of it, rather than call it the QRS, oftentimes they'll call it the R wave. So you hear it different ways. So you sort of got to take it in, you got to understand the context of the question that's asked to understand exactly what they're referring to. Okay, just as a recap, you already know P wave, which is this little hump right here, illustrates depolarization of the atria, or the top part of the heart. The Q, R, and S wave, it's one wave together, QRS, represents depolarization, or another way to think of the depolarization is action cycle of the ventricles, and then the T wave is repolarization of the ventricles. Now, one thing I don't think you actually, you probably didn't see or hear about was the fact that we do see repolarization, which is a resting cycle for the ventricles. But where do you see the repolarization or the resting cycle for the atria? We see depolarization here. We see depolarization here for the ventricles. We see repolarization for the ventricles here. Where is the repolarization for the atria? They got to rest so they can fire the next time. Well, you should be asking yourself that question, but just in case you didn't, I'm going to answer it for you. Repolarization of the atria actually does happen, but it happens usually in this time frame here, so that it's covered up. It's such a small signal, it's actually covered up by the QRS, so we can never really see that. But we know that it occurs. If it didn't, the heart would stop beating. Okay, here again is the natural progression of our electric signal through the heart. And we see the associated waves on the QRS over here. The PR interval represents the amount of time from the time the SA node fires till it gets past the AV node. And then the QRS represents depolarization time for the ventricles. And this is just recapping the same thing. P wave, atrial depolarization, QRS, ventricular depolarization, and then the T wave is ventricular repolarization. The PR interval we talked about earlier is that amount of time from the beginning of the P wave, the onset of the P wave, to, it actually ends at the Q wave here, but they call it the QR interval. I'm not sure why. But the PR interval is that time delay that we talked about earlier to allow blood to get through the atria and into the ventricle. Pacemakers of the heart. These are some numbers you need to be aware of, guys. SA node is, we call it the pacemaker or the natural pacemaker of the heart. It's actually considered the dominant pacemaker of the heart, which should tell you that there may be other pacemakers as well. And there are other ways to pace the heart in the heart itself, not necessarily a pacemaker that we install. The dominant pacemaker of the heart with an intrinsic rate between 60 and 100 beats per minute. You've already seen that. You did some research on that and you found that out. That's the normal range of heartbeats. Your heart rate is probably somewhere in this range normally. So it's considered the dominant pacemaker. But you know what? What if the SA node were to fail? It quit working. Does that mean you die? No. It doesn't mean that you'll die. What it means is the AV node will then kick in and do the pacing itself. And it does actually a pretty good job of that. The problem is it runs at a lower rate. The normal rate, if the AV node ends up as backup pacemaker, is between 40 and 60 beats per minute. So we have a backup for our pacemaker, which is good. It doesn't mean that a person can be real active or their heart's beating efficiently or anything like that, but it'll keep them alive. Wouldn't it be nice, though, if this failed and this failed, that we had a backup to our backup? Well, guess what? You may have already guessed it. The ventricles have the ability to pace themselves as well. They can pace, and again, the ventricles are the power stroke of the heart. They're the ones that The ventricles actually pump blood to the heart and the lungs and the rest of the body. So that's what we need to have going if anything's firing. So the ventricles actually have the ability to pace themselves and fire automatically. But when they do that, they end up running at a very slow rate, 20 to 45 beats per minute. And a lot of times a person could live for a while like that, but they're probably going to be unconscious because there's just not that much blood being pumped through the body. ECG paper is illustrated here. It's got some small boxes and some big boxes on it. You probably won't see a lot of the actual paper anymore because we used to use this in the old days, but they don't really use that much of it anymore. But you still need to understand it because you're still going to see representations of that. Each large box is about a half a millivolt in height. In other words, this is a big block. A signal that will go from here to here is about a half a millivolt in size. And this illustrates 6 seconds of ECG. Just FYI, this is also very important to realize. ECG paper runs at about 25 millimeters per second. So that's actually a standard speed. It's also the standard speed for going across a screen. So keep that in mind. I'm going to stop the video right now because we're running out of time on this one. And we'll come back in just a few minutes to talk about that a little bit more.